Hello and welcome back. Northstar here with another Northstar Talks Politics video for you guys. Part of my Northstar Talks Politics series. Check out the other videos. Um, Now, in my last video, I said something, first of all, that I wanted to clarify. I point out the Gilbert model, an alternative non-socialist model of class structures it's honestly, it's a bunch of bullshit and needlessly overcomplicate without any real relationship to actual material realities in the world. And I point out it's what Parenti would call derisively an anything but class analysis. Now, that might seem counterintuitive or like I'm contradicting myself because it's literally a class structure and anything but class. But um, Parenti coined that term, the ABC and analyst, to refer more to how many sociologists, political scientists these days will do anything but refer to Marxist theory or socialism to understand things because the ruling class, the bourgeois, and the labor aristocracy collaborators who people like university administrators who help enforce their will, especially like university administrators, will do anything possible to purge Marxist and socialist theory and discussion and ideas from the mainstream, from academia. You'll get right wing think tanks that actively pursue any universities that have any such things being taught in any way and try and get professors fired. Astroturfing groups that pretend to be concerned citizens, all this bullshit. Um, this is a term, though, that often refers to a blindness to class politics, but sometimes can refer to just as honestly these made up class structures that have, again, no relation to the material world, that are just something someone pulls out of their ass as an alternative to Marxist class theory, just so they can say there's something else that exists out there. Um, Anything but class could more accurately be defined as anything but socialism, but it doesn't have the nice ABC ring to it. Um, and it's important to note this is not um, when I discuss this and how the U.S. is faced with socialism or barbarism or these kind of things, there's certain things I assume you are on the same page with me about or understand, or that just are inherent to my way of looking at the world. Always have been. Maybe some of you don't. Things are not stable. I have a background in biology, so and I was very, very good at evolutionary biology. So I'm used to looking at things. Is something an evolutionarily stable system? To take a turn that Richard Dawkins would apply to fields beyond just evolutionary biology, and sometimes it is appropriate to do so. Will a system remain the way it is, or will it tend to change and morph into something else over time? If it will change and morph, it's not stable. It will be replaced by whatever it evolves into, usually until the point where it reaches a state where it won't change further. That's an evolutionary stable system where something remains a certain way, doesn't change, doesn't morph into something else. Even when it's somewhat perturbed, it'll just tend to return to whatever that state was. Um, we are not in an evolutionary stable system with liberal capitalist so-called democracy because it's really oligarchy, plutocratic oligarchy most of the time. We're a handful of very rich people. As I said, I think I gave approximate rule of thumb ratios. The bourgeois may hold 20 to 25% of the political power. Mind you, I'm not saying they don't have more votes, obviously, but they fund political ads. They fund political campaigns so that people who align with their interests will tend to get elected. And if they can win over the higher true bourgeois, they've already got about a quarter of the way to victory. Politicians, they still need to then win over segments of the labor aristocracy, the petite bourgeois, which is usually enough, and the large amounts of the proletariat, the most numerous, will just tend to go along and vote, um, whichever way. When I said members of the proletariat tend to vote against the class interest, some of them, obviously anyone who's being fooled by political ads and voting a certain way does, but I was referring, I guess I said this unclearly and probably didn't use the right words, is that there's going to be a member of the working class that will always be fooled by right wing propaganda and such, and anti-socialist propaganda, and they will become true believers in capitalism. These are the people who believe in, what is it, hustle culture and nonsense like that. They think they're just temporarily embarrassed billionaires. They think if they just work a little harder. They are not people who just vote for a given candidate because they have a better organized campaign, which is better organized because there's more money coming from the very, very rich, and because um, there are no real socialist options. There's no one who's really offering policies that really help them all that much. They vote for name recognition. They vote for who has the most political ads. Now, we're talking about the people who fervently believe in capitalism. I'm saying there's always a section of the proletariat who will go along with that shit and not realize that that's going to hurt them. And that's in addition to people who just, more politically apathetic. That plus lumpen proletariat traders to the interests of the working class. Lumpen proletariat can be considered a subclass of the proletariat, and which are often appealed to by the likes of like the Democrats, people who will promise to preserve or theoretically expand, though they never do, welfare programs to keep the loyalty of the people who are most desperate for survival, usually as a counterweight against someone like the Republicans. But the Democrats are still a bourgeois party. They try to keep things very much the same, not change things. Most of the time, it requires great effort to get a Democrat to fix anything. They'll just mostly their policy is to not make things worse. Um, and to do virtue signaling and fake symbolic changes while not actually changing the real basis, not really codifying laws that would meaningfully improve the position of, say, women or ethnic minorities, or that would, have codified abortion rights. They're not trying to move things forward. They're just trying to, because, for instance, the abortion rights thing, that would remove a divisive issue that would get people distracted from economic issues. Uh, Neither Democrats nor Republicans want people focused on, say, the income inequality in the United States and the increasing power of the billionaire class. Um, and indeed, the power of the high bourgeois or the true bourgeois, the billionaires, the multi-millionaires, is increasing in the United States. It's not stable. It's like maybe in that 20-25% range of the size political power, and it'll be 30% someday at the rate it's going. They're growing ever more powerful. Technology, AI, things like that are amplifying the ability of the very, very rich to dominate and control and manipulate the rest of the population. The control of social media platforms, increasing number of monopolies, which consolidating industries into fewer and fewer corporations, and it's already far more consolidated than it looks because they're holding companies where you have 20 different food brands, for instance. They're all really just one company, one holding company, one owner, but different names fool people into thinking there's competition when there is no competition that exists, or very little competition that exists. There's like a dozen of these food companies, these holding companies that own everything, but people will see 240 brands and it's really only 12 companies, and it's getting down to be like 7 companies. And eventually it'll be like 3 companies own all the food, and then you could expect food to be way more expensive than it is when it gets down to like 3 or 4 companies, because you have oligopoly, price fixing, gentlemen's agreements. As bad as it is now, the price of food will get so much worse if trends continue. Um, and beyond all this, beyond just increasing, shifting political power, things, even if those aspects of society weren't changing, are getting worse. Because one thing is capitalism hasn't been around forever. People have to remember that. It's only really been dominant across the world since about 200 years ago. 1825, maybe 1725. It's before that. It had some dominance in Europe, but for the vast majority of the planet, no, it did not. It wasn't until the European empires we started exporting capitalism around the world, and it wasn't even dominant in Europe before maybe, I don't know, 1600. So capitalism is a relatively new arrival in the global scene. The longer it's been dominant, people forget that any other alternative systems have ever existed before, even if they were worse systems. The point is that people can remember that other systems have existed, like feudalism, which is a worse system. Any Marxist will tell you capitalism is better than feudalism, socialism is better than capitalism. Um, so people forget other systems have existed, thus they will forget alternatives are possible to the current system, whether better or worse. And that makes it harder to consider something like socialism. People forget about the legacy of the Soviet Union, and you will have these right-wing think tanks that make up bullshit political theories. They don't act with intellectual honesty, and they are most concerned with just saying what their donors want them to say and their owners want them to say. But they will stumble across things that are half true or that are more convincing over time. So you'll get more and more complicated pseudo theories and half lies and subtly dishonest representation of things that make it harder and harder to have an honest discussion about socialism without people just thinking you're wrong because of the propaganda put out by these right-wing think tanks. There are no left-wing think tanks. There are no giant socialist billionaire donors. They're creating a counterweight to this. So, and they will also uh, corrupt academia more and more, which is just getting to be a worse and worse problem. We're already in economics, you can't study Marxist economics without being considered some sort of loose cannon or rogue social scientist, and political science is almost that point. It's getting there too. And sociology is being corrupted, and psychology is being corrupted too. Over time, it will become harder and harder to have any kind of Marxist discussion. And this is not a good thing. I know some right wingers probably think that's great. This, once the threat of Marxism is even more distant than it is now, capitalism will crack its whip even harder. It will become more exploitative, more evil, and harder to live under because they'll know it's even harder for people to consider alternatives. They, meaning the people with the power at the very top, the 0.1%, and of course the people who serve their interests, some more knowingly than others. Many members of the labor aristocracy have subclass consciousness and consciously choose to betray the majority of the population in favor of collaborating with the very, very top. Many others do not, though. Um, have that class consciousness, and um, it's going to get so much worse as AIs become increasingly capable of creating political arguments that sound convincing, even if the AI has no real ability to think. You know, these generative AI systems keep getting more refined, and they will be used to further manipulate and propagandize people. Um, and is stuff like drone technology and surveillance systems make an actual revolution if it turns to violent revolution more and more impossible, whereas the ability to automate jobs makes a non-violent general strike sort of approach more and more infeasible. And increasing corruption of the electoral system makes electoral change more and more difficult and impossible. So all three possible routes to socialism, to get rid of capitalism, will be increasingly not at all attainable. There will be no way out of the system, even as it destroys the planet, even as it drives humanity towards extinction, with the conflicts between nations and battles over resources that capitalism creates, leading to probably eventually thermonuclear war, which will probably drive humanity to extinction when combination with climate change. If it doesn't, we'll bring us back to the Bronze Age or something. People say Stone Age always, but people are going to forget that you can work metals. So more realistically, the Bronze or Iron Age. Um, but even losing the levels of politicalization that the Middle Ages had, most likely. So early Iron Age kind of technology, or late Bronze. That's what humanity could regress to after a global thermonuclear war. The few humans who survive the war itself and the resulting mass starvations. That's where humanity is headed. That, or maybe like AIs, actually sentient AIs developing, hundreds of years down the line and wiping out humanity. Either way, we're not going to survive capitalism. It is not possible. This system will kill us, each and every one of us. I mean, not us specifically, you, me, but our great, 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 great grandchildren, if we lucky enough to have any grandchildren. And with the increasing environmental footprint of each person under capitalism, people even having kids is going to help guarantee the climate change thing is terrible. So, forcing a situation where people need to choose not to have kids to even have a prayer of the planet surviving. Um, we are deeply fucked if we don't abandon capitalism. And the people at the very top don't care. They'll ride this down all the way to the bottom. They'll try and escape to Mars if they can, or they're not the people alive today. People think that's going to happen in the near future. More likely, their great grandchildren escape to Mars, but the Musk of the world and such are trying to set Mars colonies. They're run in a libertarian capitalist manner now, so that they can establish kind of a neo-feudalist. Um, they don't even really want libertarian capitalism, and they just want it as a gateway to even worse systems, which is libertarian capitalism is already a system that gives all the power to the billionaires. Um, but basically, slave societies on Mars that their great grandchildren move to, and they'll have spent hundreds of years developing the colonies there by that point and reinforcing capitalist control of them and making sure that, the oppressed people who work all day and night just to manage to pay for oxygen to breathe on Mars colonies don't have a prayer of rising up and rebelling and replacing the new feudalist oligarch whatever rulers of the Mars colonies. That's what Musk is hoping for his great grandchildren. Because Musk is a bit of a racist and possibly a neo-Nazi, he might also make sure it's all white people there and kill off minorities, which is just horrendous. But that's the kind of, I mean, I didn't think he was that bad until he started doing literal Nazi salutes, and then it's like, no, you can't excuse this. Uh, and learning about his history, I recommend looking up some of the people call it. There's a phrase, a nickname for it is the PayPal cartel. A lot of these uh, very, very, very right wing billionaires who got their start with PayPal, not just Musk, but there's like three others, and they all trace their roots back to apartheid South Africa, which is where Musk grew up. Apartheid, which is a fascist system, and there were a lot of Nazis who openly walked the street, neo Nazis in apartheid South Africa, people who would wear swastikas and stuff very openly. Um, Especially in Southwest Africa, what's now Namibia, right? And that was the area that was most Nazified, and that was a colony of South Africa essentially. And it had been a British colony, but rather than getting independence when South Africa did, it was hand over South Africa as a colony of South Africa, more or less. Think change is going to become more and more impossible. It's going to become easier and easier to censor people. It's going to become easier and easier to track down and destroy any so-called subversive elements and anyone who's spreading ideas that the very, very rich do not want spread. To rewrite history, which is a steady program that's being done by far-right groups like the Heritage Foundation, the Wilson Center. They are rewriting history bit by bit. We cannot afford to delay. You, me, anyone of conscience. We gotta. I am personally a democratic socialist, and I think it's too late for the United States. I believe in electoral change. I don't think that's possible in the U.S., and I think uh, that there's no chance that people band together quickly enough for nonviolent revolution. Violent revolution is suicidally dumb. It will not work in the U.S., so there's no hope for the United States. But I could be wrong. Um, any one of the three paths of change might be possible. I personally would like to get out of the U.S. and move to a European country where electoral paths to socialism might still be open. I think it's too late for the U.S., but and I'm hoping my YouTube channel can get me enough income. I can move to a country and say, look, I know I'm disabled long COVID. I can't work a normal job, but I do YouTube. I make money from it. That's a means of self-support. Can I emigrate here? Because I'm worried I'm going to be hunted down and tortured and killed by this increasingly fascistic regime that's the U.S. for my socialist beliefs. Um, so I personally want to leave. Others may disagree with me about this, but I'm especially vulnerable with long COVID. I'm not someone who's becoming a class trader. I'm just leaving and going to carry on the fight overseas, the fight of ideas, mind you, of talking about these things, spreading theory, and letting people who are more able-bodied and younger take the next steps. They're going to need to be, carrying out strikes and such. I can't really march in a picket line since I'm not healthy enough to work, and not healthy enough to really march for long hours in a protest. But I can sit and talk socialist theory all day and educate people about it and get others to do those things, hopefully. And if there's ever a cure for long COVID, I will gladly join on the picket lines or the marches and protests in Europe. In the US, I think it's too late. prove me wrong if you're an American. Prove me wrong. Prove there's some path to change still available. Because that's not just electing another Democrat. People think, I mean, maybe a Democrat will be elected in 2028. Won't matter. Democrats will change almost nothing. It won't be like a Bernie Sanders. I mean, look how the Democrats purged the Bernie wing from their party after 2016. It will be, if it's Democrat, it'll be another shitty centrist who proclaims to be more left than they really are, like Biden or Hillary Clinton, and nothing will be repaired really. It'd be a quote return to normalcy. Well, now the damage of Trump is undone, and however many terms of that, it'll be right back to Republicans after a while, and the damage will keep getting worse. And a system can't get worse forever. Eventually, the system that's degenerating, getting worse, becomes unsustainable, and then it collapses entirely. It ceases to exist, and you get a civil war, or you get fascist takeover, coup, or you even get the military trying to form what's not a fascist coup to protect against fascist power rising. And I mean, that's probably the best case scenario for the U.S. at this point, is that at some point the military will actually form an anti-fascist authoritarian regime, which is still not a great future. It's just better than a fascist takeover or a civil war that will destroy the country, quite possibly. That would be a war between fascists and centrists. And even if the centrists win, then it would probably still lead to fascism later, because things would be so bad, and no one will consider socialism. And so if you're just stuck with capitalism and the system that generated so first, or technically the second U.S. Civil War, then there'll be a third and a fourth. It'll just keep getting worse. Um, these are predictions. I don't want to see these futures happen. I'm not endorsing these futures happen. I'm saying that this is where things appear to be going, and find ways to prevent these futures. Uh, talk Marx, talk socialist theory, because any answer is going to, even if not being a socialist future, is going to have to include some awareness of Marxist theory and some Marxist ideas. You will never fix the system without them. Um, at the very least, that would be some social democratic systems include are informed by Marxism. I don't think social democracy is sustainable. I think it'll be undermined, and we'll get right back to the neoliberal democracy, to destroy everything in the end, just like social democracy is being undermined in the Nordic countries right now. Um, but if it somehow were sustainable, it would have to be a social democracy that's informed by Marxism and with a strong socialist party, even if it's not the governing party, that acts as counterweight to people who keep trying to undermine the social democracy. So you got to study Marx. You got to understand this theory, and there needs to be a strong socialist force in the U.S. for any hope of not ending up under fascism. Even if America doesn't become socialist, there'll have to be a socialist counterweight to the fascists. I wish you all the best. Take care of each other. Be kind to yourselves. And may you always find a guy and start to lead you home. Adieu.